You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Just like the moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides. Just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes? Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. I love those excerpts from that poem by Maya Angelou. The words embody the struggle of dealing and overcoming. She dismisses her oppressors. They may have thought they could stop her. Are you ready to rise? Are you ready to rise? What is the promise of democracy? From I Have a Dream by Dr. Martin Luther King. What did democracy mean to him, and what does it mean to us? We're dealing with hot-button issues. If I say something that bothers you, ask yourself these questions. Why did that disturb you so much? Why you? Why now? And finally, if you feel bitter, can you forgive me? The fact that you're hosting a conversation like this for your community speaks volumes about you, your commitment, and your commitment to the life and heart of the mind, to the health, vibrance, and vitality of the humanity around you. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to give a sincere thanks to my sister, Miss Monita, and the Latah County Human Rights Task Force. Let's give them a round of applause, please. What a blessing it is to be here. My goal today is to be the guy who is asking all the right questions, the guy who will lead us away from narrow, technical, in the worst sense, ivory tower discussions, away from the logic chopping, the pure conceptual analysis. Not that that's not important to do, but I intend to drag us back to the big picture. Questions of meaning and value, a vision of human nature, human good, human dignity, human rights, and justice. As David Kirkland from New York University, who taught in the same program where I did my doctoral study, says, Dr. King's dream was never static. It wasn't a destination or a soundbite. It was and is a living, breathing vision. A call to press deeper into our collective possibility, which is also our collective responsibility. It's not just about inclusion, but transformation. It's about letting more people into our current world, and not just about letting more people into our current world and our privilege, but about creating a better world for more people. It's about lifting ourselves, our communities, and our world to their highest heights. Not for some of us, but for all of us. Today, more than ever, as was said, there is still room to press on and press into that dream. Today, more than ever. Hello, I'm an optimist. That space between where we are and where we want to be holds tremendous possibility. It also holds responsibility. No matter who you are or where you're from, the dream is for you. It is for everyone. And if we embrace it fully, unapologetically, It will change everything. Here's an example. Keep thinking about today more than ever. There was a little path beside the rocky road, and Miss Flowers walked in front, swinging her arms and picking her way over the stones. Come and walk along with me, Marguerite. I couldn't have refused even if I wanted to. She pronounced my name so nicely. Or more correctly, she spoke each word with such clarity that I was certain a foreigner who didn't understand English would have understood her. Now, no one is going to make you talk. Possibly no one can. But bear in mind, language is man's way of communicating with his fellow man, and it is language alone which separates him from the lower animals. That was a totally new idea to me, and I would need time to think about it. That passage is from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, and it appears in this anthology, Listen, Children. Dorothy Strickland published it in 1982. Dorothy was my mom. The foreword was written by a great civil rights leader who was also the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, wrote the foreword to this book that my mom put together. This collection is one of hundreds of publications my mother contributed to literacy education. What a great piece of family history. Today, more than ever, King's dream is alive. My mom's story weaves throughout this narrative, the one I offer today, which is a narrative about hope. I am not okay, and neither are many. This phrase has been shared by more and more of my fellow African Americans in recent times. This phrase has also been shared by more and more members of other marginalized groups, including Hispanics and the LGBT community and anyone who is low or lower income. That phrase, I am not okay, begins the opening statement for the Human Rights Collective, a nonprofit I founded in 2020. I formed the group to help identify solutions for a hurting nation. I am not okay, those words are from the first paragraph of our origin story. Through active multimedia and in-person training and education, the Human Rights Collective aims to dismantle racism and discrimination. Last year, we became a fiscal and creative partner for the Glen Allen Project, which is an arts and creative makerspace in Pocatello. Show me this imaginary racism, then I'll do something about it. A man at an Idaho university repeated. He said that, show me this imaginary racism and I'll do something about it. Just so you know, it was not University of Idaho, okay? But he was an employee, and I was overhearing the conversation as I stood there in the library. That underscored the fact that a large portion of racism is so ingrained in our society that it had become invisible. And it is normally best formed to do this at the end, but I get very passionate about what I do, and I'm also ADHD, so I'll say it now so I don't forget. On your table, you can help by supporting the Dorothy Strickland Scholarship at humanrightstoday.org/donate. Our catchphrase is, let's make the world a better place. We'll learn more about Dorothy in a bit, but as you go to the site, if you choose to help us out, I was asked to say, answer the question, how can we help? That's one way to do it. And then if you just click to the main page, you'll see a variety of articles about racism, discrimination, and human rights. Back to show me this imaginary racism. Unfortunately, conversations like this one were and are too common. Maya Angelou said, still I rise. Are you ready to rise? My nonprofit developed organically. As an instructor at Boise State and a human rights activist, after the murder of George Floyd, I began receiving calls from the media to make a comment. bittersweet. George Floyd was an incident, but certainly not a new phenomenon. That was part of American history, that murder. But it happened to be recorded, and it happened to hit the waves, CNN, et cetera, and it created a national dialogue, one which has always been there, it just kind of blew up. So I was receiving calls as, once again, bittersweet, one of the few black leaders in Idaho who's been given a platform to comment on racial unrest. Prior to that, I originally had a blog called The Color Commentary, which evolved into an additional Facebook page called The Human Rights Report. Now it's the Human Rights Collective on Facebook. I wanted to raise awareness of racism in our state, and I began posting under the hashtag examples of racism. Sadly, I had no shortage of material. Happily, a growing and very loyal group of followers began to engage, validate, and help me validate the need for such a discussion. Melissa Davlin from Idaho Reports had me on her show along with former legislator Cherie Buckner-Webb and her son Philip, who runs the Idaho Black History Museum. A few hours prior to the show, Melissa said, you know, we'll put your fundraising link on, okay? Just put it up there. And I said, uh-oh, I better get one. At the time, I just had a blog called The Color Commentary. I was just talking about racism as a hurting black man, raising a family in Idaho, including 3 daughters, including my youngest, who identifies as non-binary, transgendered, Lenny. So I updated my WordPress blog real quick and added a GoFundMe. Today, more than ever, here's some evidence. I raised $10,000 in just over 2 weeks. It showed me the power of this discussion and how many people around here and nationally really care. The operation was formalized into a 501c3, the Human Rights Collective, in 2022. Are you ready to rise? Imaginary racism? 5 score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long, long night of their captivity. On August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to a crowd of 250,000 white and black Americans and delivered those words as part of his I Have a Dream speech. King called on all of us to live up to the American creed enunciated at its founding, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Within 5 years, Congress had passed 3 landmark pieces of civil rights legislation: the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and in 1968, after the assassination of Dr. King, the Fair Housing Act. While the legislation was a significant step forward, its passage did not usher in the profound changes needed to eradicate systemic racism. More than half a century later, some assert that little has fundamentally changed or improved. And after recent events, including the election, I can see why many think that way, including me. Prior to the election, just 1 year ago, I was at a Rotary Club meeting in Pocatello, feeling pretty good. I was invited to sit at the table with Mayor Blad and the Mayor of Chadwick, Idaho, who were addressing our Rotary with their State of the Cities, respectively, address. Very polite, welcoming crowd, my club. I'm now Sergeant at Arms in the Rotary, and on path to be Vice President and President, so there's some people in town there in Pocatello really doing the right thing for inclusion. I left for an even better reason, or equally as good, because I was meeting a donor. The Human Rights Collective was doing an online fundraiser. One of the hotel sales managers was donating a bunch of passes and some books for us to sell. So I was right across from Pocatello High School. That's where the venue was. Walked out, made a right. Was just going to walk to my car so I could go have my second very validating, happy meeting, and I heard the word nigger screamed very loudly in an even more harsh tone than I just did it. When you're recalling pain, it's hard to reenact it. And then I heard it again, the exact word, and then I heard big black monkey. I was in an alleyway, so I had walked to my right. I was in an alleyway walking, had made another right in the alleyway. So I was walking away from Pocatello High School to the parking lot that's there. Some of you know where those train tracks are in the parking lot. And I was frozen. What could I do? Think about the situation. Happens to a lot of us who are marginalized and in hostile situations. Do I suddenly become Captain America, the Fantastic Four, and go fight or something? And in this case, I was literally trapped, and there was all kinds of metaphors coming out and symbolism because I was faced with a choice. I froze up for a minute because that's what hostility does to a human being. I turned around, and all I could see were a group of basically what appeared to be high school kids walking in front of the high school. I don't know who yelled it. I don't know who they were yelling at. Was it me or someone else? My thoughts started to race. Was there a kid being abused right there? I had gone from one meeting to another in our normal rush. I had to meet someone in order to advance the very cause that comment was speaking against. And of course, I'm by myself, feeling alone, afraid, confused, not having information. I don't have a police cruiser, vehicles, radios, all kinds of things like that, call for backup. I didn't even know if it was a Pocatello High School student who said the word. So I was faced with a literal and also symbolic and metaphorical choice. Do I walk forwards or do I walk backwards? Walking backwards would have meant trying to assess the situation, see what's going on, possibly make a phone call, call who, the cops, call them and say what, someone's yelling things. And then walking forward meant I had an appointment. You know how it is when you're running a nonprofit? You got to be where you say you're going to be and do what you're going to do. And ironically, it was the exact cause that vile hostile racism was working against. It was a kind of a win-win, lose-lose, whatever. It was pick one, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So literally, and now thinking back symbolically and metaphorically, because I also had to think about myself, what exactly am I walking into? I walked forward. I walked away from the negativity, the hostility, racism, but I internalized, and I can still hear his voice saying those words. I did pause long enough to see if it appeared that anyone was being accosted, and I couldn't see anything like that. I just saw kids walking. I thought to myself, Pocatello High School has an administrator, they have a school resource officer, there's other people around. All I could do is pray that no one was being hurt. And if I want to advance the cause, I have a choice. Move forward. It was a tough one, but it symbolizes and symbolized the complexity and everything we're going through. All I can do now is keep moving forward. Fortunately, I'm an optimist, and once again, on King's Dream, I know it's there, today more than ever. As painful as that was, and here's another part of the picture, it was words. As Ta-Nehisi Coates points out, some people often assume that all racism is simply equated with individual acts of hostility, but structural racism is still deep. And as I walked forward to try to build an organization, something like what you have here, I was moving toward addressing structural racism. King believed that democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what he called the beloved community, a nation and a world society at peace with itself. With extraordinary vision, can redeem the soul of our nation. Are you ready to rise? As Cornel West said, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. This is about hope, today more than ever. Switching fonts, getting older, Switching fonts means switching glasses. Many of you know that. This book, as we speak about hope, is Open a World Possible. Real stories about the joy and power of reading. It is by Lois Bridges, and one of the participants in the book is my mom, Dorothy Strickland. This is called The Gift of Reading, Pass It On. Dorothy, I'm so glad to see you. I saved a book especially for you. It was the voice of Mrs. Lewix, the librarian at the neighborhood branch library that I visited regularly in Union, New Jersey, where I grew up. She reached down under her desk and pulled out that special book and handed it to me with a smile that seemed to say that she had been waiting all week just for me. The library in our part of town was located in a storefront nestled among several small businesses, including a delicatessen, dry cleaners, and drugstore. At age 11, I was old enough to walk to the library all by myself. So Mrs. Lewix had become one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. Context, we're in Union, New Jersey, and this would have been 1944, when there were still whites-only signs on certain places and whites-only water fountains. De jure segregation was still in place. She was perfectly round body, round face, and hair that was pulled back neatly into a perfectly round bun. She was always welcoming and pleasant. To think that she would select a book just for me made me feel very special. Whatever she selected would be read along with the books I selected on my own. Born into an African-American working-class family with parents who migrated from the South with limited educational opportunities, I don't recall either ever seeing them reading a book. Although my dad often quoted portions of the newspaper. Fortunately, my parents indulged my love of reading and seemed to know how important it was to me. Little did any of us know that I would one day become president of the International Reading Association and the State of New Jersey Professor of Reading at Rutgers University. My mom went on from there to being the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Chair at Rutgers, and prior to Rutgers, she was the Arthur I. Gates Chair at Columbia University. International Reading Association, IRA, International Reading Association, is now the International Reading Association. She also ended up in the Reading Hall of Fame. Fascinating story if you get a chance to pick this up from Open a World of Possible. Reading from a book about hope, Mrs. Lewix inspired one black girl in 1944. Here in Moscow in 2025, who can you inspire? Who can you give hope to today? Is King's dream still alive? I believe it is, and there's an example. Think about the resources we have at our fingertips now. Think about what Mrs. Lewix did. Can you be a Mrs. Lewix to someone? Have you been? And who can you do that for today? As Father Greg Boyle, who has worked to rehabilitate thousands of gang members in Los Angeles, says, no hopeful kid has ever joined a gang. One of my favorite and most fascinating quotes. Worked with thousands of gangbangers in LA. No kid who is filled with hope has ever joined a gang. Is King's dream still alive? Looks that way to me. We suffer from disparities rooted in centuries of systemic exclusion, from slavery to redlining to discriminatory lending practices. Economic inequality is more rampant than perhaps ever. How many people feel that way today? The promise of democracy. What did it mean to King? What does it mean to us? During King's lifetime, he was regularly spied on by the FBI, constantly threatened, continuously arrested, and ultimately murdered for the cause of freedom and justice for all. Quote, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. 1, collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. 2, negotiation. 3, self-purification. And 4, what you're doing here now, and what we heard about earlier, direct action. King wrote those words in his letter from a Birmingham jail. It was published on May 19th, 1963. The letter was in response to criticism of his nonviolent protest methods. The essay is considered a classic work of protest literature and a seminal document of the civil rights movement. King continues, you may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis as to establish such creative tension that a community that has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. And he said, there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so we must see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding. Imaginary racism? Is the dream still alive? Are you ready to rise? King said our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men. Is there hope? I already answered that. Today more than ever. Democratic institutions have faced significant stress in recent years, but the election reaffirmed their capacity to withstand pressure. Courts, electoral commissions, and other democratic bodies upheld the rule of law and assured the process was carried out fairly and transparently. This resilience is a testament to the enduring strength of the constitutional framework and commitment to those who work within it. While challenges such as misinformation and attempts to undermine the electoral processes persist, the ability of institutions to adapt and respond effectively offers hope. Their continued function is safeguarding democracy, and it ensures the system can endure even in turbulent times. Are you ready to rise? I was walking in Julia Davis Park one day. Some of you know that. It's one of the parks in between downtown Boise and Boise State. So I was at BSU in the adjunct office. My wife had dropped me off in the morning. We lived in Nampa, Idaho, about a half hour away, so she went home and was going to pick me up that evening. Seemed simple enough, but the story made me reflect on privilege, exclusion, marginalization, and others who are suffering. So, quite innocently, I just said, I'll tell my wife to meet me. Actually, I was in downtown Boise having some very good sushi. And I said, I'll just walk across Julia Davis over to the campus, and I'll go sit in the adjunct office, and I'll have her meet me there on campus. Sounds simple enough. Well, it was a little colder than I thought. And, oh gosh, a few blocks in, it started raining. It was raining and cold. Once again, in my privileged mindset, able-bodied, economically privileged, eating sushi, having an office, et cetera, I said, well, I'll just walk in the cold. It's raining. So what, right? I guess I'll get wet and be cold. I got about halfway through the park over there by the zoo, and I realized something. It suddenly started downpouring cold, freezing rain. I was halfway in the park. I could not sit down. There were some benches, but the benches were very far away. And even if I went to the benches and sat down, I'd be sitting in the freezing rain on a wet bench. What good would that do? Back to the idea of, do I move forward or backwards? Well, in this case, once again, I couldn't move backwards because it was equidistant back to the restaurant as it was to my office. I was standing with not enough clothes on in the freezing, pouring rain in a muddy park, and I was too tired. I needed to sit down for my mind, my body, my soul, and my health. I absolutely had to I needed a blanket, I needed some hot chocolate, I needed a chair, and I was standing in the freezing rain, equidistant, back and forward. The only way I could go, logically, was forward. That was it. And I was, once again, to everything. Here's the thought. Well, one thought is I'm going to have to suffer. And in addition to me rising up, bearing it out, realizing I'm going to be a little too wet, a little too sick, maybe even, I don't know, catch a bad cold, I had kind of the ultimate thought, slightly later on. What about the people who go through that every day of their lives? How about the people who are too cold every day? The people who are stuck in the mud every day? The people who don't have the proper clothes every day? Oh, and how about the ones that don't have an adjunct office to go to with a code they can just go in and sit down? How about the ones that don't have a loving wife at home who's coming to pick them up from the adjunct office? Et cetera, et cetera. It made me reflect on everyone else. What about the ones who don't have the kind of job like mine where I can give the students assignment and call in and tell them I was sick and tell the story? What about the ones that have to stand all day tomorrow at Fred Meyer or whatever it is? Reflection for me on those who are marginalized. Reflection on my own privilege, able-bodied, economically privileged, marital privileged. Wow. It hit me, and similar to being yelled at, even during that N-word outside Pocatello High School, there were elements of my own privilege there. I had a choice, forward or backwards. I had a choice, communicate with various authorities. How about those who don't feel tapped into various authorities? How about immigrants or who are afraid to talk to authorities who are being abused because of their race or ethnicity and don't have some of the choices that I have? Wow. Gives me pause. And a sense of gratitude. A sense of gratitude that I'm in a situation like the one I'm in, that is, standing here today, working with and speaking to people such as yourselves. Do you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes. Shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Are you ready to rise? So as a reminder, this particular scholarship has gone out a few times. One time it went to students from the Ukraine who otherwise would not be in the United States. They are part of the intensive English program at Boise State University. Another version of scholarship went to a first-generation student of color who is majoring in English at Idaho State University. And I hope to extend the Dorothy Strickland Scholarship to University of Idaho because I'm standing strong, but there are many who are not. I'm searching my conscience saying, can I be Mrs. Lewick today for someone? I'm looking at you, feeling like I love you. I know that Martin Luther King had a dream. I want to continue it. I am not afraid, but many are. Let us gather together. Let us pool our collective wisdom, our strength, and our resources. Think about Dorothy Strickland under effectively Jim Crow segregation in 1944. She was given hope. Let's bring that hope to Idaho right now. Thank you.